One Nation versus Greens. Hello, I'm Ivan Leung and welcome to this special presentation from WAMN News. As the McGowan Labour government stands ready for a landslide victory in the state election, the upper house becomes the key battleground for legislative control. Minor parties such as the Greens and One Nation are gatekeepers of policies during critical moments when major parties disagree with each other. With the vital function of holding the government to account, their voices in the upper house can often change policy outcomes. In this debate, One Nation WA leader Colin Tincknell and Greens MLC Diane Evers will go head-to-head regarding their views towards renewable energy, jobs, cost of living, COVID-19 and government accountability. This rare debate will reveal to voters where both parties really stand on key issues. Here are the ground rules. Both participants will be given 60 seconds for the opening and closing statements. The bell will ring once with 15 seconds left and ring twice when time runs out. 4 key topics will be discussed during the debate without time limits. Welcome to this rare insight into minority party upper house politics. Thanks for joining us. We've got Diane Evers and we've got Colin Tincknell in the studio. Both of you, thank you for your time and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane Evers, we start with you. It begins now.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased to be able to do this because we're in the middle of a climate crisis as well as a jobs crisis, and the Greens have plans that we know will take us through this time and lead us to a better future. Now, all of our policies have been developed by our extensive membership across the state, and we would like other people to have a look at those and know that we stand here for addressing the climate crisis. We plan to have 100% renewable by 2030 and net zero carbon by 2035. And we also know how we're going to get there, because through drawdown we can bring it down into our soils, we can store it in our forests, we can store it in our oceans. We also know that while doing this, while addressing climate, we will be able to have many jobs for people in the renewable energy industry and in agriculture and in the forest rangers. We will also be helping the social issues too, because we know that people, particularly in the regions, need equitable services.
Colin, it's your turn.
Look, I think the important thing this election is the accountability that holding this government to account. When I look at the important things to the electorate, I'm a Southwest member, so the important people to me in this election is the Southwest. But as the leader of the party, I also look right across the board, and it's those important things: job security, health, road and transport issues. And also, I think the most important thing in this election is it looks like the government may win this election, and who's going to hold them to account? It looks like numbers in the Liberals and the Nats will be reduced, so the crossbench is going to be very important. Looking at job security and house security, if you want to move into the country area, at the moment there are not many homes to be purchased or rented, so we need to look at those issues as well.
Colin, you're 5 seconds ahead. So the first questions, of course, for many people is the recent announcement from the Liberal Party regarding the renewable energy policies, and followed by the Labor Party backing it up. Now, your electorate is very special because it includes Collie, which of course there's a coal-fired power plant in there as well. So the first question that I'll go to you is, Colin, what's your energy policy when it comes to One Nation, and do you believe the coal-fired power station should be shut down?
Not yet. That's the simple answer. I think it's going to take time for that transition to happen. We're supportive of renewable energy, and we want renewable energy to work just like every other West Australian does. The problem we face here is when they've moved too quick, both in South Australia and Victoria, and now again over in Texas. In America, they've had major problems with the cost of their energy. Now, it may be okay for rich people and people that are earning good wages to be able to pay a little bit extra for energy, but so many of our public, especially now, out of a job or underemployed, cannot afford that extra cost. So if renewables means extra cost at this stage, then that is an issue. That's an issue for a big percentage of the public. The other thing is, Collie's been around a long, long time and provided that energy very well for a long, long time for all West Australians for over 100 years. Now, that transition needs to be done slowly and needs to happen at a pace that works for all West Australians, not just people that are ideology connected to this and want to really push this issue. I think we have to think of the public, people before politics. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that, you know, if we're going to have this energy movement, and we saw what happened in the last federal election, Bill Shorten was given a bit of a rubbing up in the last election, and the reason was because the Australian public said, too quick, too fast, we're not ready, and we can't afford to do without all those jobs. Now, renewable energy, they talk about the jobs that are created from the renewable energy industry. I'm looking at the jobs that are created from cheap energy. That's why manufacturing struggles in Australia. It's one of the major reasons why you know, we don't have manufacturing. Now, in this last pandemic, we said that we wanted to do manufacturing. And the reasons we don't have manufacturing very well, especially for essentials, the reason we don't have it is our energy is too high already. So can you imagine how high the cost is going to be if we move to renewables quickly without that proper transition?
Diane, what's your response?
People in Collie know that the end of coal is coming. We have to look at transitioning. How are we going to transition from the time when we've been producing energy with coal to when we'll be producing it with 100% renewable energy? Now, there's so many different opportunities for that. And what we have to do is make sure that the people in Collie are looked after, they've got all the infrastructure to put the energy into the grid there, and that's how it'll be changing. Now, the climate issues are urgent. We can't delay this. But that doesn't mean you start it, you know, immediately. What we do is we have to be transitioning. I understand some of our coal-fired power stations are not even actually operating a lot of the time because we have so much renewables already going into the grid. This idea that it's more expensive for renewables has been debunked over and over again. New renewable energy is cheaper than the old standard of coal and gas because those ones have a huge startup cost and they have continuing input cost. Whereas with renewables, once you've got them going, they just continue. So you have to look at the long term for that. Now, I appreciate that we also have to look at the wider grid system in that we need to make it easier for people to contribute into the grid from other systems, from where communities set up their own wind generator or their own solar bank and solar supply. And we have to acknowledge as well that many people are going off-grid, including many industries. Now, Simcoa is the largest user off the grid in the southwest. What we need to do is find another energy source for Simcoa to be able to continue on their work, but not using that energy from the grid.
Diane, the Greens plan says rapid transition to net zero pollution economy that's primarily based on renewable sources, efficient energy conversion process. Now, there's also part of it says that Western Australia transition to 100% renewables by 2030 for stationary energy. Now, this all sounds fantastic, and there's also another part that says commissioning plan to set 100% renewable scenarios for WA electricity market by 2030. Is it possible, and what are the costs?
I can't tell you the exact cost of each item, but yes, it is possible because we need to transition there, because if we don't know the cost of actually addressing the damage caused by climate, look at the costs of drought, look at the costs of extra fires, look at the costs of increasing windstorms. There are so many costs involved in climate crisis that we are not counting. We are not even preparing for it. The insurance companies, they get it. They are understanding that there are increasing costs from climate crisis. So what we're saying is we need to transition as quickly as possible by making this available and by encouraging people to pick up renewable energy sources, because it's not just wind and solar. We also have geothermal, and there are places that are currently being looked at for potential geothermal energy. Also wave energy that's been proven that down off the south coast, one of the best places in the world, because that swell that we've got down there is so consistent, day and night, year in, year out. There are many sources, and what we haven't seen, not only from the state government, but our federal government, is a willingness to support research and development of renewable sources. This is our future, and the longer we delay, the more it's going to cost. So that's what we have to be looking at, and that's what the Greens are pushing, because we are looking here to the long-term future, for the future of our children, our grandchildren, and so forth. There
are policies involved, but they want to know the cost. So how come so not to have a go as you again, but where's the cost to it? Why does Green have
to know the cost as well? I want to know the cost of not doing it. But what we've got in Western Australia, of course, is we are having another mining boom. We have so much iron ore being shipped out regularly, partly because of COVID. The interest is more on the Australian side because we can keep it going, plus the price is going up. We are an energy-rich and mineral-rich state. our issues with cost can be addressed by this, because of course we have to do it because the cost of not doing it is not being counted.
But
and
you
that's
don't know
what
what the cost. But you don't know what the cost is. Potential cost of not doing. Do you know the cost?
I've asked the government this, and they are not even looking at it. They are not even beginning to think, what is the cost of, say, those fires that we had in February in the Perth Hills? The cost, all they can look at is the cost of actually trying to address them and putting them out and everything. But what's the rest of the cost to that landscape, to the people that live there? We're not addressing that, and that's why we need to switch to renewables, so that we actually can make this a safer place to live. So I acknowledge you're asking me the cost of renewables by 2030. That information could be made available. I don't have it to mind right now, and I don't think that we can just be focused on that, because if we're only focused on the cost of putting in renewables, we must also be costing the expenses involved in not doing renewables.
Colin, your response.
I think the important thing here is that renewables is something we all want to work. We have one big issue, and that is the storage of that power, whether it's wind or solar. And the battery setup at this stage is very expensive, and it hasn't been able to produce the same as what baseload power can. So for households and for smaller setups, it works well. However, for factories and manufacturing and big industry, it doesn't work well, and it's an issue. And that's the problem. And I think when you look at the costs, as we mentioned before, they are important. You know, there'll be businesses saying, you know, we'll bear the cost, whatever, but there's people, you know, the local people out there, especially right now when we've had this pandemic and we've had a lot of unemployment, and one thing that's really becoming very common in West Australia as well as the rest of Australia is underemployment. People are now accepting part-time jobs instead of full-time jobs. I don't ever remember people years ago accepting part-time jobs. It was you either had a job or you didn't have a job. These days, with the cost of doing business, companies are employing people for less time. So those costs are important. I think the other thing that we must remember is that we have some examples of where they've moved very quickly. They've moved quickly in South Australia, they've moved quickly in Victoria, and just recently in Texas, they have moved very quickly to renewable energy. And the costs have gone through the roof. And they are having major problems. Now, this is a big state with a lot of people, millions of people, and their costs have gone through the roof. So there are examples, and we need to make sure that we learn from those mistakes. And if we are going to transition into renewables, that it all works very well and we keep the costs down, because in the end, high energy means lack of jobs. It means lack of manufacturing and a lack of opportunities for the young people of WA.
Let's talk about jobs, which is the second question. Now, the coal-fired power plant does employ a lot of people, especially to, I suppose, the region in the Collie area. So, if that power plant goes, where does the job go?
There are so many jobs available. We just have to get out of this old way of thinking. And I do have to comment, the idea that there weren't people with part-time jobs. Maybe in the past, Colin, you didn't know about women who had children at home who worked part-time while the kids were at school, or students who studied part-time or studied full-time and had to work part-time. You're talking about white males that were supporting a family, and it's a very small group of the people. What we've got now is we want to have job flexibility, employment flexibility. We want people to be able to work in the industry they want to, at the time they want to, in the location they want to, and that is by having diversity. Now, you say, Ivan, that Collie has a lot of jobs working at the power plant. We're not saying that there's not going to be power. We know that in renewables there is plenty of jobs available, not in the construction of those panels and those wind towers and the other infrastructure we need, but also in the installation of it. And then there'll be some maintenance jobs there. And once we get that up and going, so that our energy costs are actually cheaper in the long run, and even possibly up front, because we not only address the energy source coming in as renewables, but we have options for, there's battery backup, there is pumped hydro backup, there is the solar array backup. There is so many different options for that. And it's an old way of thinking to think that we have to worry about base load, because we've got to look at when the energy is needed and when we can supply it. Now, also, getting back to the question about the jobs, not in the region. Now, another thing that we're going to have to do with the coming climate crisis and the issue about the emissions that will continue to be put out, because some of our industries will continue to emit, we need to be storing that carbon back on the planet. We need to be storing it back into our forests and to be managing protecting our forests for the long term. We're going to have a ranger program, $60 million going to a ranger program to get Indigenous youth and other youth back on country, looking after it, knowing what needs to be done, and being there to help it grow and support it. We're also looking at youth and others being able to retrain through a TAFE system, a free TAFE system, so that as youth are coming up through the education system, they have opportunities there, as well as people who want to retrain from whatever job that they were doing that maybe this century we won't need to be continuing with. And they can retrain and learn new industries, such as construction of the housing that we need down in the southwest, such as back on agricultural land. And rather than going for very strong monocultures, we're actually looking for diversity, because diversity breeds resilience, and we need our farming landscapes to be resilient so that they can provide the food and give us food security into the future.
Colin.
I think a lot of people focus on the jobs actually in the industry, you know, the energy industry. And whilst there'll be jobs lost in Collie, you know, because of the coal, and then hopefully there'll be some transition into other areas, including renewables. The main thing here is not the people in the industry, it is the people that can't get access to cheap energy. That means small businessmen, big businessmen and large businessmen. That means a lack of manufacturing. That means a lack of jobs all round. And we have proof of this. We have seen this happen in other states, both here and in America. So that's the big thing here. I mean, for me as a Southwest member, I mean, we need to value add. You know, we need to do, like happening in Kemerton Business Park right now. We have a lithium refinery going there, and not just the digging out the lithium out of the mine at Greenbushes. We need to value add, and it's very hard to value add when the cost of energy go up, and that means it'll cost jobs, and those opportunities won't come in the future. You know, we've said all along, for the whole 4 years that I've been a crossbencher in Parliament, we've been trying to push the government, and I can't get nothing out of this government or the alternative government, the Liberal Nationals, can't get nothing when it comes to red tape, green tape, the cost of doing business. And they aren't interested. We brought up a motion in the Parliament 2 years ago. We didn't get any support whatsoever from any party. We need to reduce the cost of doing business in this state. Payroll tax, especially for small businesses. Now, small businesses aren't businesses that run, you know, turn over $500,000 or $1 million. A small business is someone that turns over 20 or 30 or 40 million. And you still don't make a lot of profit out of that. It is turnover is one thing and profit is another. So payroll tax either needs to be reduced even more through the thresholds, or completely reduced in the percentage, or what I'd like to see is it abolished. But unfortunately, payroll tax is something the government have got comfortable receiving from businesses, and it costs jobs. It's a tax on jobs. That means it's a tax on young people getting those opportunities in small business. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that could happen, but there hasn't been a stomach from either this government or the previous government to do the hard work, because it is hard work getting those changes made, and you need to drag other parties with you to get that support. That's what we do as a crossbench. We work with the other parties, and we'll make sure that this government, who keeps making promises, Ivan, about 100,000 jobs, 200,000 jobs, and yet I think in the 4 years they've created 60,000 jobs, and yet I don't know how many they've lost. It'll probably be more than the 60. So yes, it's been tough during the pandemic, but they are putting the building blocks in place for people to really grow their opportunities and get those jobs. And this government is not friendly to the regional areas. So I do not see that support happening in the southwest.
Labour force data from the ABS. Youth unemployment 13.9% increased by 1.8% over the year to January 2021. Now, in WA, the unemployment rate is 6.2%. All right, so Colin, let's start with you.
Yep.
What are your plans to reduce youth unemployment?
Well, you know, like most of those things I talked about then, it is about keeping the cost of energy down, and it is about value adding and being able to allow small businesses to run at a lot reduced costs. Now, when we talk about unemployment is 6.2, that's true, but underemployment is through the roof, and Mandurah is through the roof. Mandurah in youth unemployment is the highest in Australia. Now, I'm not proud that that's one of my areas in the southwest, but it is a really tough area. Mandurah have got a lot of people out of jobs, and there's no incentive. There's no incentive from this government for small businesses to employ people. High payroll tax, everything is very costly. We have to reduce the taxes and the costs on small business. That's the number one thing. As I mentioned before, value adding. How do we do the value adding if the energy costs are too high? There are the building blocks that need to happen. Look, young people in our state are inventive. They will take on anything, and they are, very much entrepreneurial. This state has produced the best entrepreneurs in Australia for about the last 50, 60 years, ever since the mining boom started around about the 70s. And so that's why this state has done well. But during those times, we had cheap energy. We are not heading in that direction now. That's what worries me, Ivan.
I was about to add in to the point, the underemployment rate is 7%. In WA, according to ABS, now that's for January, seasonally adjusted, it went down by 0.6%. It's just a footnote. Diane, your response.
All right. I should first point out that I am an accountant, and I have been a small business owner prior to moving to Western Australia 25 years ago. So I understand the issues that affect small businesses, and I understand too that there are a lot of businesses that find it difficult to make that next step to becoming an employer. And I think what we need is some supports for small business so that we can help these businesses expand or diversify, or even come up with cooperatives where they can work together and share the staff that they might need. Because I believe that we have the opportunities here in WA, but it's about matching people up and helping those youth to find the thing that they want to do. Because I think our education system and our mental health support system is, in some ways, just keeping people going through the same systems that we've been doing. We need to advance on that so that we can start matching them up to work they want to do and getting them more involved in their communities and in the small businesses so that they can find that work. Because with youth unemployment, I think that's it. There's, having had 4 children of my own and going through the system myself, your dreams and ideals need to be opened up to see what's available, such as in the Southwest, where we've got agriculture growing our food. That is such an opportunity for value adding and to bringing these younger people in to find out how they can contribute and how they can learn a lot of skills. So back to our TAFE issue with making TAFE free, we really want people to train up in the conditions, in the area of employment that they would like to advance in. So I think that's where we really need to go. Now on a larger scale with unemployment generally, again, it's still about training and getting people to the place where the jobs are available. We've got a lot more tourism happening in WA now that we've had the borders closed for some time, and I think that's opened up a lot of ideas for people to see what's about in their own state. And I think we need to encourage more of that, particularly in the regional areas, and actually help develop those small businesses that are catering to those local WA tourists so that we can actually take advantage of that. And then in the region, what I see happening is, I've heard suggestions that we could see a 50% increase in residents in the Southwest over the next 10 years. We need to be prepared for that. They're going to need accommodation, they're going to need services, and we're going to need people who can provide for those new people coming down, and also jobs that they can get involved in. But most of the Greens policy, so much of it has jobs in the regions based on changing us over to renewables, based on looking after our forest, looking after the planet. We even have $125 million in a nature fund. Now this came from a bill that I put through in the last term of Parliament, looking for $100 million from royalties for regions to support all those community groups throughout the regional area who are working so hard to protect the biodiversity and the landscape from the ravages caused by the many introduced species of both plants and animals. And I want those people to be recognized and supported so that we can look after the planet, so we have something to pass on to future generations.
Diane, do we have enough jobs in the Southwest?
We've got plenty of jobs there. It's a matter of matching people up. In the agricultural area, as you would know, we're still looking for more people to be harvesting our fruits and vegetables down there. We are also getting more people moving down there, so in some communities just trying to find a barista is very difficult. So people are having to fill those roles themselves. It would be actually excellent to find people coming down there willing to take on these positions. But of course what we've had is the people move down there and take up the residences and their holiday homes and take them off the market. It's very hard to find rent down there. So the issue we've got is actually finding accommodation for the people who are wanting to move into the region. It's just a balancing act, and I think the Greens have a lot of the vision necessary to be able to make that work through this next term.
Colin, before we move to the cost of living, your response.
Yeah, look, the housing issue is important. The government has no plan for this issue. We've been wanting to get people to move to the regional areas for many years, 30, 40 years, because we've been so centralised, especially WA. Just about 3/4 of the people of Western Australia all live in Perth. So we've been encouraging people for many years to move to the country. But the government has no plan. There is no cheap rent. There is no cheap houses. And, you know, if you want to buy or if you want to, you know, pay a lot of money for one, well, you can. But that's no good for young people. Young people, if they want to get a job in Narrogin or they want to get a job, you know, in Williams, or they want to get a job in Bunbury, they've got to have access to homes. And at the moment, that access is not there. And the reason why it's not there is because of the costs. Stamp duty is high. You know, we talked about reducing stamp duty in the last Parliament. We talked about stamp duty, reducing it for pensioners. We'd also like to see the home, the first home buyers not only just be there for people that want to build brand new homes, but people that want to buy established homes. So it encourages young couples to move to the country regions to buy a home, and that stamp duty is dropped. So there's so many things that need to be done. I think the other one I wanted to mention was, you know, there needs to be a giant increase in social housing. I don't think social housing stocks have ever been as low as they are. We know we have a pandemic. We know there are a lot of people unemployed or underemployed. We know people are having trouble paying their rent or their mortgage, and yet we don't have a safety net. There are nowhere for these people to go. We've seen homelessness go through the roof. So, look, they're all connected. Everything is interconnected. Like I said before, the West Australian public are very smart. They just need to get those opportunities, and the cost is very restrictive at the moment.
Okay, let's talk about cost of living. Now, the main thing is, Colin, I will begin with you first. You talk about the age pension fuel card. You're pushing to increase from $575 a year to $750 a year. Is it viable? Do we have the money to do it? Given that we spent more than $1 billion on the new babies hospital.
Well, we also spent a lot of money on offering city people a capped price for travel. And if we can do that in the city, then we should be doing it in the regional areas. As I mentioned, this is a city-centric Labor government who doesn't support the regional areas well. So that should have been an automatic. The minute you plan something for the metro area, you should be looking, well, what's the alternative for the country area?
But what about
that's why we came up with that plan, Ivan.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what about Labor's other regional plans then? How can you say it's metro-centric when they have plans for the regional areas?
They may have plans and they make many announcements, but they just don't roll these things out. And we've been hearing about Metronet for 13 years and they haven't laid one piece of rail yet. We heard about homelessness.
But work is underway, though. Work is underway, though. How can you...
Well, it's up to 13 years.
You have to do the work before you lay the tracks, though, isn't it?
13 years planning Metronet, their signature policy, has not gone well. Look, you know, they talked about they were going to do something for homelessness people. They made an announcement 2 years ago that they were going to do a major thing. And then they talked about doing Housing First, which is a program we released to them. And they said, yes, we're starting it. That was 2 Decembers ago. And then their reason for not running it out, Ivan, is that we have a pandemic. And I made it quite clear to them that in a pandemic there's going to be more need to support homeless people and social housing. And yet they've done nothing, absolutely nothing, other than make announcements. This government's good at announcements, but not great at rolling out their promises.
Diane, your response.
All right. With the cost of living regionally, I think that housing, of course, is number one. That's going to be the thing that will be increasing. But we need to address that with more housing, social housing and affordable housing. But we have to build these sustainably, and we have to build them in the right areas so that people can access things without having to have a vehicle in every case. And that brings me to transport. It's really lovely that in the metro area we've got a cap on transport. What we need to see in the regional areas is more and more frequent transport between regional cities, because these are often tried on trying to find out on a cost-neutral basis. But the thing is, what the government again doesn't cost is the cost of not having them and people having to drive more and more often, and the cost to extra traffic issues and road issues. So we've got to make transport more available, because I know there's a number of young people not getting their licenses, not owning vehicles, but if they live in Bunbury, they've got a really difficult situation trying to get to Perth now and then, because often the Australind isn't running and it's very slow, and we need to actually invest in that. So we will be investing in
but the government is already committed to invest the new trains.
Yes, but those we haven't seen that happening. I think
they already made the announcement, already made the design, though. They're going to build it in there.
So you look at the They're also looking at the fast train to Bunbury, so that's something that we also believe that this should be looked into. They haven't been looking at additional bus transport between communities in the regional areas, though, and that's something that they should be, because the more public transport we can have in the regional areas, the more accessible different job opportunities are and health issues that they can transport in some of the regional centres. And of course that's in the health issues too. We need more specialist care in the regional centres. We have to have much better accessibility to mental health care in the regional centres. I understand in Broome, if you have a suicidal teenager, you might have to wait 2 weeks before they can see somebody. Now, I hope to be told that that's not the case, because that is just completely unreasonable. As a parent, you know, that's just not something that I can see as something the state could agree to. So we need to have more accessible, a greater range of services in our health centres so that people don't have to travel to Perth for every minor procedure. It just makes a lot of sense to be able to have care in your own home, your own community. And that leads into aging in place. Another thing that I think people, as they're getting older, they don't want to have to leave their communities. So we have to make sure in some of these smaller regional centres that we're planning to have age accommodation in smaller communities so that people can age in place, stay with their friends and family, and see how that works out. Additionally, education. Education up through primary and secondary schools should be free, as well as at TAFE level, because a well-educated population is a good population to have that will be resilient for whatever comes in the future and have those opportunities to change from one thing to the next. So this is all valuable to regional people as well as metro people, because we want people to live their fullest lives if they can.
The last topic, and the most important topic, and that is government accountabilities and your role as gatekeepers. Now, do you believe the government has managed well when it comes to coronavirus? Diane?
I didn't expect you to go straight to coronavirus with that. I think
well, it's part of the accountability issue.
True, true. Following the science makes sense. Look where we are now on a worldwide basis, even within Australia. We can't deny that it's been done to the best of what could be for Western Australia. Personally, I'm very happy that we're not going around wearing face masks and watching our elderly pass away well before their time. I think that's been done well, and I'm really appreciative that we listen to science, because listening to science is what the Greens are all about. It's got to make sense, and we want the government to listen to science on some of our other broader issues such as climate. I think COVID showed what can be done very urgently when necessary. It was only for about a month out of the last 4 years. There was 1 month where I saw both sides of Parliament working collaboratively, and it was an eye-opener because it shows that it can be done, rather than having a government and opposition with the opposition opposing everything and working in an adversarial system where all they could do was try to make the government look bad. We had 1 month where we needed to get through some really good COVID legislation to make sure that we could deal with the policing issues, with the quarantine issues, with the health issues, and that happened. And I saw the two sides of Parliament collaborate and work responsibly to come up with good legislation. That's what we need to see ongoing. I don't expect to see it change immediately, but that's where we need to be headed, because with climate we will see. COVID was a very urgent issue. We saw it happen. We needed to do something immediately. But the climate change is happening much more gradually, and our governments are just coming around to it. In the last term of Parliament, my colleague Robin Chappell brought on a debate on whether climate change exists, and everybody in the Parliament agreed. Climate change exists. Great. I think now it's time to actually say that climate change exists, humans are affecting it, and humans can do something about it, because the urgency is coming up very clearly. Now, if we take this to a broader issue of accountability in general, my concern with this election is we see that the Labor government is doing very well. We know they're going to get the lower house. The upper house needs to be a house of review. It needs to stay a place where other parties can look at the legislation and review it and make sure that it goes through well. And that's what I see happening now. I see that we need to, Labor, yep, fine, do well in the lower house, but we don't need to see them get more than half the upper house seats. And that's where the Greens will come in, to be able to work with them to make sure that we make good, progressive legislative changes so that people are protected and so that the planet is protected and so that we continue to have good jobs, good meaningful employment for people who want to be employed, and that so we progress, adding value to our mineral extractions and adding value to our agricultural produce, because that's where the jobs are. That's where the employment is. That's where we can keep people working well to actually make a difference in this state and remain a very well-balanced, very profitable state that looks after its people, because that's what we're here for, is to look after the people, look after the planet, and make sure that we go into the future, into the next term, with those things in mind, because we want them to have access to the education opportunities, the health opportunities, the employment opportunities, and we want to do this with low energy costs through renewable energy that doesn't cause more damage to the climate, that doesn't make it necessary for us to have even greater drawdown opportunities through our forests that need to remain standing, and through our agricultural systems that with regenerative agriculture we can put carbon back into the soil, have it retain water, have it retain those nutrients that are so vital to providing nutritious food for all of us.
Colin, what makes your party better than the Greens to hold the government to account? You've been drumming it on all the time.
We come from a different position than the Greens. I think everyone can clearly identify that. You know, looking at the pandemic, I would say the Parliament handled this well. People want to give all the credit to Mark. Well, they really don't know how Parliament works. We had to make those decisions, like Diane mentioned before, and we had to make them so it worked very well for all the people of WA. And I saw 6 different parties come together and work together to make sure the things that needed to be done. And also, we see that the Chief Medical Officer is now deciding everything on behalf of both Zach and Mark last night. You just wonder whether the Premier or the Opposition Leader are going to make any decisions whatsoever. Of course, it's not quite that way. That's the way they would want you to believe it. But the facts are, you know, this whole situation of the pandemic and where we now find ourselves. I think it's now more important that we have a strong crossbench. There's a good chance that One Nation and the Greens will be the only people in the crossbench at the end of this election. And that's going to be important. That means our role will be even more important. Now, while the Greens and us disagree, there are times on transparency and accountability that we've agreed on many things. And it may be on mental health or issues that concern people, we have been able to agree on things. I think I look at the accountability situation and then look at our track record. Over the last 4 years, we saw that we saved somewhere in the region between 4,000 and 5,000 jobs in the gold industry. They were going to decimate 11 mines out of 19 in the gold industry in WA. That's what this government was going to do. We were able to talk to other members of Parliament and get them to agree with us to stand against that tax. That wasn't a tax they took to the government, took to the electorate. This is something they slipped in. Then there was the lobster industry. They were going to take 17.5% away from the lobster industry and socialise that. And who knows who they would have sold that to. The facts are, once again, another policy that they dreamt up after the election. They didn't take it to the election. Look, Ivan, I'm on record saying that if we happen to have balance of power in the upper house, we'll use it very wisely. And if this government gets returned, we'll know that the people of WA who are smart have chosen that this government is going to be the government for the next 4 years. But I also know the people of WA want some insurance in the bank. And that's why they vote for parties like One Nation, because they know that we will stand up when there is something wrong and we won't be too scared. We're not worried about what the press may say about us. We're not worried about perception or political correctness. If there needs to be something said and stood up for, we'll try and fight for that issue. Look, there was other issues too. Just in my region, they were going to do away with you know, community resource centres, or very much reduce them, and many of them were going to close. We fought for those to stay open. They changed their mind. School of the Air was going to be done away with. We fought for that. They changed their mind. You know, Mora College. There are many things. I could name 20 or 30 areas where the crossbench performed very well, and One Nation was one of the biggest players in that crossbench. So it's important. I say to the people of WA, Ivan, that if you want this government to be held to account and you don't want another WA ink on your hands, now we may have heard the opposition leader talk about that in the debate. It is real. The last time this Labor government had ultimate power in both houses, we had WA Inc., where the Premier of the state and his you know, big business buddies all went to jail. And that's not a great thing for WA.
The last question I will be putting forward is, what are the difference between Greens and One Nation? It sounds like exactly the same. What's the difference?
You want me to say this? Okay.
Both of you. Yeah, what's the difference? How do you differentiate yourself?
You know, I think every party now has environmental credentials, and I'll give the Greens credit for that. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years, they've been fighting hard about making sure that companies and people respect the environment. So there is no argument there. It is about trying to make sure that we work in a sustainable way. So that's where we come in and say, well, okay, we need to make sure people are also important, and that the plants and the animals are also important to all of us. But we have to do it in a sustainable way. I worked for about 28 years in the mining game, and mainly for Aboriginal people, but also for pastoralists and other people where mining was taking place on their land. And so the environment and the way we handle industry and mining, and we all work together, the mining companies now are good at that. They were not good at that 30 years ago. The oil companies were disastrous at that, and they're only getting a little bit better now. Still got a long way to go, and that goes for gas as well. But the mining companies have stepped up. They still make blues like anyone else, and we saw that recently with the Rio Tinto, and those things are going to happen. That's reality. When you have thousands of people working on a mine site and one person making a wrong decision, those things happen. So the difference between us and the Greens is that we aren't looking at a climate crisis. We say that climate is changing, and we still don't know all the reasons why. They go through cycles, and humans have an effect, but how big an effect is the debate? That is the debate, and that's where we disagree with the Greens on that issue. And that's fine. They have a right to have their opinion, but there's a big segment in West Australia and Australia right across who also say, and it borne out in the last federal election, that they aren't ready to make those drastic changes because they will be without a job and they will not be able to support their children into the future.
Diane, very briefly, we're running out of time. But
all right. I'm sorry to have to say, but climate change is happening, and we do know why. It's because of CO2 and CO2 equivalents in the atmosphere. This is science. This is 100% true. We have to accept that is it. Okay. Now, I'll just go on about the difference with us. Often I hear Colin saying he agrees with the Greens, he agrees with what I'm saying, but he votes with the Liberals, and that's how it is. It's not what you're saying and what you're doing, but how do you vote when you're in Parliament, and that's what it comes down to. And, you know, I love the comments about this, but look on their voting ticket, Greens are last. If he agrees with the environment being important and climate being important, why are Greens last on the voting tickets? I don't understand. Now, the other thing is policies.
Where have you put One Nation last?
Because you disagree with everything we do. You vote against us. There's your debate. Okay, climate votes is the next one. Policies, the next one. We've got 1,500 members in WA creating our policies. We have got an extensive platform, all available online. You can see what we stand for on every issue, and we stand by that. We vote with that. It's not just about 9 points that come up for the election, and this is what we're going to do now, and we're going to bag Labor every chance we get. That's not it. We have our policies. They're developed. They're well thought through. Many of them go back 10, 15, 20 years, and we just keep updating them each couple of years to make sure that they stay up to date, because every now and then some of the things that we've been pushing for get through, and we're really pleased about that, and we want to see more of that because we're taking us into the future. We're not going on the old way of thinking that'll keep us in the past, because the people who think that way got to their positions of power by the system as it is. So why would they want to change it? We know the system needs changing if we want to see sustainability, because we are actually after sustainability for all people, for the planet, so that we can go into a future that is clean and beneficial for all concerned, including the biodiversity. We are looking toward the future, and I don't see that. I see many of the parties, particularly on the right side of politics, which is where One Nation stands, looking to the past and trying to keep things from changing. Well, I have to tell you, things are changing, and I want to make sure that we are changing in the way that this state wants us to change, and that we don't just let it happen to us and see greater effects from climate change hurting people, devastating our farmland, our cropland, our forests. We need to actually take us into a future where we can live a healthy, resilient life in symbiotic with the planet as it is. And that's what's different about the Greens. We're here for the future.
All right, I think we are out of time, so we'll finish with closing statements. Colin, you begin. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, look, 1 minute's not long, but what I'll say is there's no wonder why Mark McGowan doesn't want One Nation in this Parliament, because we stand up to them. They are a socialist Labor government. They have got union members in positions of power, and often Mark doesn't make the decisions. We don't see what goes on behind the scenes. One Nation always will stand up. If there's an issue that's going to affect the bulk and the majority of people, we'll stand up. And that's one reason why Mark doesn't want us there. I think our record over the last 4 years has shown when Labor government or any government gets too big for themselves, they need to be held to account. That's why he wants us last. He wants other parties to put us last. That didn't work. We will be in this next election, and we'll have members in the upper house keeping an eye on this government.
Okay, so we're 5 seconds early. Diane, your turn.
Yep, we need to have Greens in the upper house to keep it a house of review, so that when Labor puts their legislation up, it is looked through thoroughly to see how it affects people in Western Australia, how it affects the planet, the biodiversity, the landscape, and all of that. Because we will be focused on making sure that we live a sustainable planet, sustainable lifestyle here, and we will be looking after people by making sure that people get the services that they need, they deserve, and that we can afford. We are a very wealthy state with so much being extracted from it, and really good agricultural systems. We want to look after the people, we want to look after the planet, and we are here for the long term because we know that we need to go into that future holding firm to the reins and making sure that we make the right decisions. So put the Greens in the upper house, make sure that we keep it a house of review, and make sure that we keep the Labor Party accountable so that they are looking after people and not just looking after their big donors, because that's not who should be running the state, it's you.
Thank you for both of your time. Now, Diane Evers and Colin, now, we always say for both One Nation Greens doesn't often sit in the same room, and especially during election time, because we all know that you're down in the regional areas. So thanks for your time, and all the best for your campaign.
Thank you
very much. It's a pleasure.
And you will see the highlights of this debate and discussions coming tonight, usual time, 5:30, Sunday evening news and WP, and of course Ian Cook's analysis along with it. Until then, I'll see you tonight. Thanks for watching.